Doug asked me to say something about prayer because the assumption is that I know something about prayer that others do not. Well, I do, and I should, because after all, I was a pastor for 40 straight years. But for the record, while I do know more things about prayer than most people, I still have more questions about prayer than I have answers. And the unanswered prayers in my life only add to my long list of questions. When long-term prayers go unanswered in my life, I've got lots of questions as to why. And I have to say there is also the temptation just to stop praying. But what keeps us going are the stories in the Bible that encourage us to pray and let us know that our prayers matter and make a difference. And one of those stories is recorded in Exodus chapter 17. After the joy of leaving Egypt and the thrill of seeing God part the waters of the Red Sea, the nation of Israel was confronted with a crisis. An enemy by the name of Amalek had come out against them with the intent of destroying them. So Moses calls a strategy meeting, and after meeting with his generals and his leaders, they have decided on a battle plan. And the battle plan is this. Joshua, who is the leader of the army, will choose his very best soldiers and go down in the valley and fight. Moses, who is the leader of all the people, will choose his very best men, two of his very best men, and go up on the mountain and pray. And Joshua is in complete agreement. He would rather have Moses pray than for Moses to fight, because after all, Moses is 80 years old and his soldiering days are over. And when you think about it, there's a wonderful balance between the two men. Joshua will fight. Moses will pray. Neither could do what the other was doing, and neither could do without the other doing it. Well, the battle begins, and Moses prays. Now, you know he's praying because his arms are stretched out to God, which is a biblical posture for prayer. As long as Moses is praying, Israel is winning. But when Moses lowers his arms, Israel begins to lose the battle. And suddenly Moses sees the connection. He realizes that his prayers on the mountain have some kind of effect on the battle on the ground. And the two men who are with him see the same connection. And so they find a stone for Moses to sit on, and they hold up his 80 years old arms in prayer. And because Moses never stops praying, Israel achieves a much needed victory. Now that story alone should encourage us to pray when there are no answers to our prayers and we have so many questions about unanswered prayer. That story lets us know that whether we realize it or understand it or not, our prayers matter and they make a difference. We may not see or understand how God works, but he nevertheless works in our life. I've had my share of crisis in my life, just like you have. And the reason why is believers, we don't live in Disney World, we live in the real world. We have lots and lots of problems. And like Moses, I've come up with a battle plan. I've prayed. I've let God know that I've done all the thinking, all the planning. All God has to do is listen and follow my plan. Now that's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? But that's what a lot of us do because we think that is an intelligent, wise approach to prayer. And maybe there's some wisdom in coming up with a plan, but what we need to remember is that God doesn't need our plan to solve our problems. God always has a better plan, but it's a plan we may not understand. In Romans chapter 11, after Paul explained that while God is at work with the church, he has not abandoned his plan or his promises to the nation of Israel. Sometime in the future, God will take up his work with the nation of Israel and will fulfill in a very literal way every promise that he has made to them. Every promise. And having said all of that and carefully explained it, Paul says this in Romans chapter 11 and verse 33. He says, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments." Now note this, How unfathomable are his ways. I do not understand the ways in which God works in my life. I wish I did, because I'd sleep a lot better at night. But just as we don't have to explain to God how to solve our problems, God doesn't have to explain to us how he will. But even though we may not see or understand how God works and that he is working, he is nevertheless at work in our life, and our prayers matter. They make a difference, which is another reason why we need to pray.